There's a couple of things happening that I think it's important for people to understand. One is that the last ships that left the Gulf before the war began, they moved pretty slow. They're only just arriving at the ports in Japan and in Korea now, right? So the actual shortage hasn't begun.
The oil crisis is solving itself, and nobody's talking about it. The market is panicking about oil surging over $111 a barrel. Headlines are screaming about inflation, traders are pricing in rate hikes, all for good reason, but here's what nobody's talking about. The oil crisis may just be solving itself. And if I'm right, it changes everything for your mortgage rate. Let me explain. Over the past few weeks, I've been telling you to lock fixed with penalty protection because the world was too uncertain. War, inflation, bond markets breaking, central banks trapped. That call hasn't changed, but for those borrowers who choose not to work with us and get our fixed rate with a penalty reimbursement program so you can in fact relock later when fixed rates drop again, you need a variable rate mortgage in order to take advantage of relocking at lower fixed rates in the future. So today I'm going to show you something that made me a lot less worried than I was 2 weeks ago about taking a variable rate. There's a path through this oil shock that doesn't require Trump to solve anything, and if oil stabilizes, yields can settle, central banks can pause, and the escape hatch in your fixed mortgage becomes very valuable. If you're new here, I'm Greg Williamson. I have over 30 years in the Canadian mortgage business, and this channel exists because I believe mortgages should be managed, not guessed. Every week, I cut through the noise and I give you a clear strategy, not a hedge, an actual call. And sometimes that means showing you something that the mainstream coverage is completely missing. So let's get into it. Powell is buying time. Before I get to the oil story, let me tell you what the Fed just did, because it matters. On Monday, Fed Chair Powell talked yields down. He essentially told markets that the central bank may pretend that the oil shock isn't even here. His words, the Fed can look through the current energy supply shock. He said monetary policy works with long and variable lags, and by the time any tightening takes effect, the oil price shock is probably long gone. This is exactly what I said in last week's episode. They realized that hiking rates to fix a temporary inflation spike due to oil is not the way to go. Translation, we're not hiking. We're betting this passes. Meanwhile, oil blew past $104 and as of today sits at $111, highest since mid-2022. And the OECD is now forecasting 4.2% inflation for 2026. Powell is buying time. He's betting that the war ends soon and oil settles before inflation becomes entrenched. Now, that's a gamble, not a strategy. And here's the thing. When the Fed has looked through inflation in the past, it's typically led to disaster for mortgage rates. They ignore it too long, it gets worse, and then they're forced to overcorrect harshly. So why am I less worried about that happening than I was 2 weeks ago? Because I've now seen the oil math and it's way better than the mainstream coverage suggests. The oil crisis is solving itself. Here's what nobody's telling you. While everyone's focused on surging oil and war headlines, the global oil system is quietly rerouting around the crisis without Trump, without a peace deal, without anyone solving the war. In just 3 weeks, the world has MacGyvered 2/3 of the Strait of Hormuz oil flows back into existence. Let me say that again. 2/3 of the oil that was blocked is now flowing again. And it happened through bilateral deals that don't involve the United States at all. Pakistan made a deal directly with Iran. 8 vessels. Oman made a deal. 3 tankers left carrying Saudi oil along Oman's coastline. India has made a deal. China has had a deal since the beginning, and Europe, is making independent decisions, but we know they are ratcheting up their purchases from Russia, if you can believe it. Australia is making independent decisions, and they're looking to make deals with anyone that can get them oil, and now there are lots of countries that could help them. Notice a trend here? None of this is being facilitated by the USA. The number of energy deals happening right now that bypass the US is probably without historical precedent. Why? Because the US had sanctions all the time. Long term, the reality that all these deals are happening without the US blessing makes it even more likely that the US petrodollar gets replaced. I've heard rumblings that it could be the Chinese yuan. Yikes. That is bad for the US, and that's a story for another day. But here's the key insight. Iran's leverage is decaying faster than anyone expected. Like, think about it from Tehran's perspective. They thought the Strait of Hormuz was their trump card. See what I did there? Block the strait, hold the world hostage, but in less than a month, 2/3 of that choke point has been bypassed. Countries found workarounds. Pipelines got used, storages got tapped, ships got rerouted. If Iran doesn't monetize this disruption now, they lose their window entirely. So what's happening? Iran and Oman are reportedly co-drafting a strait management strategy, essentially a toll regime. If you pay a fee, your ships will pass safely. That's the unlock that puts everything back to normal, despite what Trump or this war does. What looked like an energy crisis is becoming an expensive but manageable subscription fee on global oil flows. Is it ideal? No. But is it cheaper than $150 oil in a global recession? Absolutely. Let me give you the numbers. Right now, the world is getting roughly 13 to 14 million barrels a day flowing, about 65% of pre-war levels. That includes Iranian oil through the Strait. UAE oil is now through Fujairah and now above pre-war levels. Saudi oil is going through Yanbu, also above pre-war levels. Emergency releases from reserve stockpiles are happening. Drawdowns from floating storage is happening. Now, admittedly, those things are super short term, but it is working nonetheless to get back to full balance. Hey, listen, right now we need about 5 to 6 million more barrels a day. That's roughly 5 to 6 additional tankers passing through the Strait daily. That might get done this week with either another country or two making a deal directly with Iran, or the toll strategy is executed on, or Europe plugs their nose and takes even more oil from Mother Russia. Either way, it looks like the pre-war oil supply returning to normal could be imminent. There are over 150 fully loaded tankers waiting inside the Persian Gulf right now. We need 6 a day more to return to normal. I think we're close. The capacity is certainly there and it exists. It's about willingness, and the willingness is emerging through bilateral deals, through sovereign insurance from China and India backing it, through the shadow fleet that moves oil regardless of what Western sanctions might be. So here's the bottom line. The market adapts when it's properly incentivized. It always does. We saw it with LNG in 2022. We're seeing it now with global oil. And Iran is realizing that their leverage is decaying with every workaround that the world finds. They're better off cutting deals now than holding out for a war victory that isn't coming. Especially, and this is important, if Iran has finally accepted that they're not getting nuclear weapons, and Trump realizes that the regime change that he wanted isn't going to happen, well, Iran didn't get their ultimate deterrent, but Trump didn't either, so both sides have reasons to wind this conflict down. What this means for rates. If WTI oil stabilizes even at elevated levels, say $85 to $95, the panic subsides. Inflation expectations come down from the current extreme. Bond markets can breathe, and here's what matters. Central banks can breathe and pause. Powell is already signaling he wants to look through this. The Bank of Canada is in the same position, trapped between weak labor markets and inflation pressure. If the oil shock resolves itself through these bilateral deals and the toll regime, both the Fed and the Bank of Canada get what they need, an excuse to do nothing. No hikes, no cuts, just hold. Yields can drift back down, not collapse, but settle. And when yields settle, fixed mortgage rates stabilize, ease, and drop. This doesn't require Trump to negotiate peace. It doesn't require this war to end. It just requires the oil math to keep improving, which it seemingly is week over week. So has my call changed? No. The call is still a fixed mortgage with penalty protection. Here's why. The uncertainty hasn't disappeared. The war is still happening. Trump could escalate this. If he deploys ground troops, then the theory I've been talking about on this show likely gets pushed out further. Iran could escalate. Oil could spike again tomorrow. But here's what has changed. There's now a visible path to stabilization. And if that path plays out, yields settle, fixed rates ease, then your escape hatch becomes very valuable. Let me remind you how our penalty relock program works. If you lock fixed today at, let's say, 4.5% or higher with a bank and rates drop 6 months from now, you're stuck. They'll quote you a $15,000 penalty to break that mortgage and you're dead. You can't do it. With us, we split that penalty with you 50-50 on anything up to $5,000. If the penalty is over $5,000, you're capped at $5,000 and we cover the rest. So instead of being blocked by a $15,000 penalty, with our lenders, the penalties are lower already, so maybe it's $5,000, and we split it 50-50, so it costs you $2,500 to lock in at another 5-year fixed rate at under 4% while your neighbor's still stuck at 4.7. So if the oil crisis continues to resolve itself, and if yields drift down, if fixed rates drop, you capture that. You relock at the lower rate, you're not trapped. And if I'm wrong and rates go up, you're glad you locked in when you did. This is what managed mortgages look like. You're not guessing once every 5 years at renewal and then doing nothing. You're actively positioning yourself. You have a plan, you have an escape hatch, and you have someone watching the market for you. That's the difference between shopping for a rate and managing your mortgage and reducing your overall interest costs. Look, the mainstream coverage is all panic, $111 oil, inflation surging, rate hikes coming. That one's the most laughable. But when you look at the actual oil flows, the bilateral deals, the math, there's a path through this that doesn't require anyone to solve the war. The crisis may be solving itself. Slowly, expensively, sure, but it's happening. If you have a mortgage decision coming up this year, now is the time to lock fixed with penalty protection. You get certainty now, and if I'm right about the oil math, your escape hatch lets you capture any drop in the rates. If you want help navigating your mortgage, click the link in the description or the pinned comment below to book a call with me or my team. See you on next week's episode. Thank you.